Hello dear friends in Korea, I'm Marc Destrubé, I'm a violinist and I'm speaking to you from an island across the Pacific Ocean. And I think I met many of you in Myeongsa last year, and Yunshik Kim asked me to speak about music and about literature. So of course there have been many books in my life that have affected me very deeply and perhaps also affected my music making, but I thought perhaps it was more interesting to talk about a book of music that has affected me very deeply and which I think almost every violinist remains busy in his life. And I have a little miniature copy here. It's Bach's 6 Sonatas and Partitas for solo violin. And Bach absolutely wrote this as a book, as a set. In fact, he writes Libro Primo, the first book, at the beginning of it, with the intention presumably of writing other books, which he did. He wrote 6 suites for cello, and then he wrote 1 partita for solo flute. He writes on the title page, "Sei solo," which means 6 solos, but it also means in Italian, "be alone." There's a kind of double meaning, and I think this is rather beautiful because the violin isn't and wasn't traditionally a solo instrument. It was an instrument to be accompanied or to play with other instruments. And so he makes the point that this music is for a violin to be played solo on its own. The way in which this is a book, I suppose it would be a book comparable to a book of short stories, because there are 6 of these sonatas and each one has multiple sections. And each tells a different kind of story. 3 of them tell a more formal story based on the old Italian church sonata style, and 3 of them tell a more secular story based on the old French dance suites. He moves from the lowest string on the violin, the bottom G string on the violin, and one of the darker keys, G minor, through these 6 sonatas, from the minor keys, the generally more sad keys, through the famous chaconne right in the middle, And in the middle of that chaconne, which is a kind of famous monument in music, he goes from minor to major. So this beautiful shift from the sad mode to the happy mode, as it were. And then the two sonatas, Sonata and Partita, that come after that are both in major keys. And he finishes in E major, which is the top string on the violin and also the brightest key, the most sunny key in Western music. And this is an interesting progression because he really goes from darkness to light, and this is something we find a great deal in his music, especially in his church cantatas. And there's just this idea that pervades much of not only musical literature, but literature itself, and religious thought, which is that the passage from darkness to light for humanity. I think most musicians will turn to the music of Bach, and not just classical musicians, but also jazz musicians, pop musicians, in difficult times for comfort and consolation. And I think this is because Bach's music has incredible structural integrity. It's food for the mind. He takes all the musical forms that existed in his day, and he develops them in a way that's so sophisticated and interesting and clever. But at the same time, his music has incredible emotional depth, very expressive, and you could almost say spiritual depth and beauty. And so I think it's this combination of kind of intellectual, mathematical rigor and pure human expression and beauty that makes it just very special music that one loves to be immersed in when times are difficult or when one wants to be comforted. I think it's interesting to think, because you're an organization exploring books and music, about how literature, written literature and music are similar and how they're different. One of the things that's fascinating is that the book of music, or the sheet music, the printed page, isn't the music itself. It's simply notes. And this is, I don't know how it is in Korean, but in English we say, here's the music. But in German they say, here are the notes. So they have a different word for the written notes and for the music, what one hears. And I think this is an important distinction. So these are just the composer's best effort to write down his musical idea, to convey what he would like the interpreter, the musician, the performer to play. So it's a very different relationship that we have with a printed page than we have of music than we have with a printed page of literature, where the printed page of literature is the art form itself. Another aspect, I think, where music is quite different than the written word is the ability of music to express different sentiments or different emotions at the same time. So you can actually have optimism and sadness, or anxiety and nostalgia. You can have those things intertwined, so you can actually listen to a piece of music and you can feel two different emotions at the same time, which I think we can do as humans, but in literature it's more black-white. You can't express the two different, possibly conflicting emotions at the same time. And I think this is something that Bach does very beautifully in these pieces, especially the kind of hopeful feeling that music can give, along with thinking about the past, or thinking sadly or reflectively. Music, especially music of the Baroque time, definitely has a language and is in many ways like speech, in the sense that or like literature in the sense that there's punctuation, we take pauses, there's silences, it goes faster, it goes slower. The music asks questions, it exclaims, it makes statements. So there are many, many ways in which musical expression especially from the Baroque period in music and also the classical period, very much resembles the spoken word or the written word. And I think you can see the function of the performing musician in this music very much as a storyteller. He's taking the text that he finds in Bach's book in this example, and he uses it to tell the story that Bach has laid out for him or her. And in much the same way as one will tell a story very differently to a child, for instance. If children love to hear the same story repeated, we'll do the same with pieces of music. We might tell the story one way one day and a different way the next day, or in music we often have sections of music that are repeated, so we might tell that little bit of the story one way and then we'll repeat it in a very different way or in a somewhat different way to give a different impression.